Welcome back to the Daily Dope Show. I'm your commentator, Brando. Um, and for those of you out there in Twitter, just because I have the word dope in my name doesn't mean I'm some kind of idiot. All right. So, anyway, you might see me on Twitter doing other political things besides just weed on my Daily Dope Show name, but it's only because that's kind of like where I'm at mostly to find news about weed. So I run into a lot of different people. And today I stumbled into some white ethno nationalists, they call themselves. But really, what they ended up being is just a bunch of racists, and it was kind of weird. But anyway, a little bit off topic. Um, I'm gonna read this article. Trump's opioid agency fails to cite marijuana's benefits despite mounting evidence by Paul Armentano. You might know him as the one of the directors of NORML, um, deputy director of NORML, National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws. Um, so basically, this article is in response to something that happened not too long ago. A video I did was entitled, I believe, Chris Christie's Opioid Commission ignores 7,800, you know, comments about medical marijuana or cannabis being able to help one way or another in this opioid epidemic. And I believe I linked to this form right here where you could send your comment in, and I will link that again in this video here, just to go ahead and keep giving them more comments. But yeah, and that's what happened. Is Chris Christie gave his report to basically like, hey, here's what people were telling us about the opioid problem, and here's some things that we think we can do to help fix it. And it was all bullshit. It was like, well, we can get more pills. We can make some pills that we can use to. They literally said addiction vaccination. They're trying to pump more naloxone or whatever. They're trying to pump more of that out there. More band-aids for the gusher that's your jugular vein bleeding, guys. So anyway, they say everything and they try everything except for marijuana. Even though, like Paul Armentano says right here, the evidence is just overwhelming now. Let's go ahead and read this. Despite the growing body of scientific evidence showing that cannabis access is associated with reduction in opioid abuse and mortality, President Trump's Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and the Opioid Crisis remains mum on the subject. Their silence is unacceptable. It is time for the administration to stop placing political ideology above the health and safety of the American public. Just last week, data published online in the American Journal of Public Health reported a 6.5% decrease in monthly opioid deaths in Colorado following the enactment of retail cannabis sales. Quote, this reduction represents a reversal of the upward trend in opioid-related deaths in Colorado, authors concluded. Their conclusion was hardly unique. Data published in 2014 in the Journal of American Medical Association Internal Medicine reports that medical cannabis regulation is associated with a year-over-year declines in overall opioid-related mortality, including heroin overdose deaths. Specifically, medicalization states experienced a 20% decrease in opioid deaths as compared to non-medicalized states within 1 year. This decrease climbed to 33% by year 6. A 2015 study published by the National Bureau of Economic Research linked the establishment of state-licensed dispensaries to reductions in opioid deaths. Traffic fatalities involving opioid-positive drivers had also fallen in states that implemented medical marijuana laws. Cannabis medicalization is associated with the reduction in opioid-related hospitalizations, according to a 2017 study published in the journal Drug and Alcohol Dependence. Legal medical cannabis states experienced a 23% drop in hospitalizations related to opioid dependence and 13% decline in hospitalizations due to overdose. Patients in states where marijuana is legal, use for fewer prescription drugs. Let me read that again. Patients in states where marijuana is legal use far fewer prescription drugs than do those in jurisdictions where it's prohibited. According to a pair of recent studies published in the Journal of Health Affairs, the passage of medical cannabis regulations results in a significant drop in Medicare and Medicaid-related prescription drug spending. Separate studies find that many registered medical cannabis patients diminish their use of pharmaceuticals. For instance, a 2017 University of New Mexico study reported that the state of registrants often reduced or even eliminated their prescription drug intake over time, while non-registrants with similar medical conditions did not. A study assessing state-qualified patients in Illinois concluded that many subjects consume cannabis intentionally to taper off prescription medications. A 2017 analysis of Canadian registered cannabis patients reported that a majority of subjects self-reported substituting marijuana for prescription drugs, particularly opioids, benzodiazepines, and antidepressants. A separate review of over 1,500 state-qualified patients in New England similarly determined that patients typically use medical cannabis as a replacement for opioids, anti-anxiety drugs, and sleep aids. To date, over 10,000 communications have been sent to Trump's Opioid Commission asking its members to consider this growing and compelling body of scientific literature. And you don't have to be a scientist or a doctor or any of that, or even a patient. You could just be somebody that knows somebody that's a patient. And all you got to do is go to the link below to this article and fill out this form here. And the start writing, you got to like fill these out. And then when you hit that start writing button, it gives you like a form letter, I believe. And then you can change the form letter. You can delete what's already on it and just write a whole new one or just add stuff to it or wherever you want. And then send that off. I've already sent one in, but I might do another one just because. So anyway, so far 10,000 people. And at the time when the Opioid Commission was looking at testimony and gathering data, there was, I believe, 7,800 comments at the time were forwarded to Chris Christie's Opioid Commission, and they basically just chucked them right in the fucking garbage. All right, yet to date, the Commission's sole response to these requests has been to suggest that marijuana, quote, is associated with higher rates of opioid use disorder and prescription drug misuse. Is associated with don't make any mistake about it, that's a legal term. Is associated with doesn't mean anything at all. But you're allowed to say it because you can prove associations. And this is garbage. An allegation that was recently rejected by the National Academy of Science, which in January 2017 review of some 10,000 peer-reviewed studies failed to identify even, quote, one good, fair, quality systemic review that reported on the association between cannabis use and the initiation of use of opioids. So that's the National Academy of Sciences, and they looked at 10,000 studies and couldn't even find one even close to being that showed an association between. So really, they don't even have this association that they're using as a legal term to really say nothing at all anyway. Because what they really want to say is that, hey, cannabis use is, directly leads you to opiate abuse disorder and, prescription drug misuse. Ain't that funny how they say that it leads to prescription drug misuse? And yet up here, what we found out in all these different actual studies was that people use less pharmaceuticals and then sometimes just quit using them altogether. And that's what they mean by prescription drug misuse. They can legally say that when people use medical marijuana, then they run into this prescription drug misuse. And I'll tell you why. One of my patients was getting a prescription for Percocets, and her doctor at the time wasn't into medical marijuana. And what did her doctor say? When she started using less of those Percocets, her doctor started saying, "Oh, you gotta take them according to the bottle. And if the bottle says you got to take one of these every 3 hours or every 5 hours or whatever it says, you got to do it that way, or they won't work right, and we can't be held responsible for anything that blah blah blah, or just whatever they want to say." And that's, in their opinion, that's prescription drug misuse. So that's some fucking bullshit, by the way. Anyway, so they're living in opposite land, and the commission itself is, in my opinion, is a fucking travesty. All right, we didn't need this commission in the first place. We already know what the problem is, and we're already seeing like the pharmaceutical people getting in trouble and shit for all the shit they've done. And basically, what you need to do is open up medical marijuana so that people can actually get prescribed medical marijuana for pain instead of fucking opioids in the first place. Hello? All right, and then finally, Paul ends this by saying, "No one is opining that cannabis is the sole cure-all for America's ongoing opioid crisis." And I've been saying that in every fucking one of my stories that I've made about this. So don't anybody jump on me and say, "Oh, man, you make all these videos about the opioid crisis like marijuana is some kind of cure-all and it's going to end the opioid crisis and these people aren't going to die out there." I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that it's a very valuable tool that's just getting left in the tool shed. And now it's starting to rust on the fucking hook. In places like Alabama and all these places where marijuana in general is just really taboo, and you got your right-wing Christian coalition of, judges and all these people that are still stuck in the 1950s. They're not going to budge anytime soon. So unless we make this a national emergency type situation and say, yes, cannabis is a fucking tool that we can use, then there's going to be a lot more deaths. And these deaths are all on your hands, Chris Christie. Remember when you called marijuana fucking tax revenue blood money? Well, every time a fucking junkie dies, part of it was he was bringing you with him while he was going to the grave. He was grabbing a piece of you and taking it with him. Lucky you're as big as you are, because there's going to be a lot of that going on, man. Your opioid commission is fucking, it's literally killing people because you guys are totally doing the wrong thing. You're talking about the wrong things. You're not focusing on shit, and you ignore one of the tools that you could be using to save lives. Nonetheless, the available data indicates that it may play a potentially valuable role in mitigating this public health emergency. It is time for the administration must set aside its canna-bigotry and stop placing politics ahead of American lives. Great article by Paul. And you see here a little bit more why this is a big deal, why this should be on the front fucking burner, and all this talk with, Tom Price and fucking Chris Christie and Pam Bondi. You guys aren't being you're being disingenuous is what you're doing. You're leaving people to die. You're talking about things like, addiction, vaccinations. What in the fuck are you talking about? You're basically just talking about handling the opioid problem with more drugs, of course. So over 60,000 Americans die every year, the opioid epidemic. Since 2015, the opioid epidemic killed more Americans than the entire Korean, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan wars combined. In just less than 3 years, guys. I'm sure that's 2015 numbers, so 3 years. We're on par to beat last year. In fact, drug overdoses are now the leading cause of death for all Americans under the age of 50. It is one of the greatest health crises of our time, and unlike the natural epidemic, it is a drug distribution industry along with our enabling government and healthcare providers who are almost entirely inflicting this scourge upon us. Joint Washington Post 60-minute story over the weekend showed exactly what happens when bipartisan Congress puts greed over humanity in the middle of a raging opioid epidemic. Former DEA Administrator Joseph Ranazizi revealed how the three drug distribution companies, namely Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen, colluded with Congress to allow millions and millions of drugs to go into the bad pharmacies and doctors' offices that distributed them out to people who had no legitimate need for those drugs. And I've done stories about that too. They basically lied to insurance companies, lied to the DEA. Those companies used their powerful lobbyists to work with Representative Tom Marino and Representative Marsha Blackburn, Republicans, to push a law through Congress that crippled the DEA. Obama eventually signed this piece of shit, so he's just as much to blame. The Ensuring Patient Access and Effective Drug Enforcement Act of 2016 effectively stripped the DEA of its powers to freeze shipments of suspicious sales of hundreds of million dollars of opioid pills to vulnerable patients. And once again, with Republicans, as usual, they always come up with these Orwellian double-speak fucking names. Ensuring patient access and effective drug enforcement. It's the exact opposite, because Republicans live in opposite land, like I keep saying. In essence, it allowed drug distributors to make massive profits peddling dangerous addictive drugs like oxycodone and Oxycontin unchecked to vulnerable Americans at the cost of their lives. In fact, the drug lobby spent over $102 million to pass this law, with the three biggest players being the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America contributing $40.8 million, CVS Health throwing in $32.5 million, and the National Association of Chain Drug Stores dishing out $8 million. They did so on the behalf of three drug distribution companies that control 90% of the market. Meanwhile, they'll give you a manufacturing marijuana charge and throw you in fucking jail for like 30 years because you had, a couple hundred plants. Meanwhile, Tom Marino was set to become our nation's nominee for drug czar at the time. Marsha Blackburn is still set to run for senator of Tennessee to replace Bob Corker. These campaigns are obviously not cheap, and the drug lobby contributions are obviously welcome. Fortunately, the freedom of our press did what our government and healthcare providers could not. It uncovered a severe injustice and protected our most vulnerable patients. No, it didn't. This was all because of the whistleblower. This has nothing to do with fucking the freedom of our press, which is good that we have it, but half these mainstream media outlets don't give a shit about that. They basically do the bidding of the state. They're basically state-run media. And if anything, they're basically just a microphone for the CIA to put out propaganda. But anyway, once again, I'm getting off topic. I try to stay as close to the topic as I can, because I don't want to scare people. But just a final word on this shit. Yeah, we're fucked, man. The government is so corrupt. There's just like absolutely no connect between the people and the government. They're working against you. They're out to get you. They're out to take every penny you got. They're out to get you addicted to these drugs. And they're out to, make as much money as they can. The politicians, the drug manufacturers, they're all just, the greed is just unchecked, unstoppable. And yeah, there's nothing really we can do about this, but one thing they can do about it is let us try to fucking solve this thing with real common sense solutions. And one of them is to not throw people in jail for fucking drugs. Start there. Start handling this like it's a health crisis like it is, and not some kind of a criminal problem, which it also is. But, hey, focus on prevention your own way. Just get people the help that they want. Don't have cops doing it. And for fuck's sakes, let people use marijuana. Marijuana, prescribe it for pain. Number one thing for pain is marijuana. The worst thing for fucking pain, fucking opioids.